What modalities are you talking about?
Audio, video, music, all of these things that are directly outside of text.
So what are some of your other predictions for 2026?
Some of the other things I was thinking about is rich media. A couple of years ago, we had the first video models come out, and they were really bad compared to what we've got now. So right now, you already had first commercial projects. I think we had a Coca-Cola ad that was fully AI generated. I think that's the first one that I know, like a big company has actually done something really commercial, something they spent a lot of money on playing it during Christmas. I think that's gonna come along even further, and we're gonna see a lot more of that. So I put one prediction of first mainstream movie short gaining prominence. I was thinking about putting it as a wins a big award, which I did put in the brackets. There might be some more kind of technical, boring, or kind of human reasons why it might not actually win an award. But it feels to me, if the right people, the right directors gonna start using these tools and actually create the content that they like, then I think they can create really cool stuff with it. The tools are really getting very, very good. I think animation is probably the first place where we're going to see this a lot more, just because we're a lot more forgiving about errors in animation. And this is why in 3D generations before AI, they also started from animation. They started like the Toy Story famously didn't have any human faces in it because it was easier to not do them, and it was easier to get away with any mistakes or any kind of inconsistencies with how humans see human faces. So I think it's probably going to have the same path. We'll go by animation, maybe some more surreal things where errors or continuity issues or things like that will be more forgivable, and then we'll go to far more realistic. But it's not to say that realistic things don't work. If you're careful and you're precise and you're deliberate, then it can already work. But it's pretty inevitable that VO4, when it comes out, or Sora 3, inevitably going to be much, much better than what we've got right now. And even right now, you can already mistake AI-generated videos for being real videos. I mean, I certainly have done that myself already.
So in the early days with Stable Diffusion, some of the very, very early AI image generation, you would look at the number of fingers or the limbs, and that would be an immediate tell that this was AI generated. What are the experts looking at today that make them say, oh, this is a really good model, or it still needs some work?
Yeah, so there's still some mistakes you can find, especially maybe rendering of text in the background, or there could be some details or some reflection, so you can kind of pick out some errors. Yeah, you can maybe zoom in and go into the pixel peeping on videos. You can definitely pick up some errors still, which you increasingly cannot do with images. It's harder and harder to do that with images, but with videos, these kind of rule of thumb still apply. There was a trend with animals doing gymnastics or diving in the swimming pool in a kind of Olympic style format. And you could definitely see there's so many issues still, but some models were just getting to a point that were just about possible in terms of just their body movements and how coherent they were. But there were still issues where the limb would go in a completely unnatural way, or there's something like a little bit off that you can't quite pick up. So that still definitely happens. But I would say character consistency over a longer period of time, where you've got movements just start feeling natural, where you don't notice it anymore, that's probably the best guide. If you don't realize, if you don't notice, that's probably the best rule of thumb. Something interesting we saw with VO3 originally was where they merged the audio into the video. And this was kind of a mini viral moment where people started with the single prompt. They could get their character to say something or sing something. So that was the first movement into that direction. And people found that really, really impressive. The next step we saw was Sora 2, where they did the same with merging of the sound, but then they kind of merged also the storytelling part of it, where from a single prompt you can say something like, take this character, make them tell a joke. Then the model itself would come up with a joke for the character to say.
Good morning, my darlings. It's the 5th of October and apparently the people of Paris are still upset. Shocker. We have a crowd forming. They're very enthusiastic. Love that for them. Quick cake check. Still better than bread. Shouldn't we be? Babe, let me finish. Outfit refresh. Wig still defying gravity but barely. Carriage ride with Louis. He's thrilled. Absolutely terrified. Streets are a bit spicy today. 10 out of 10.
You start making it easier and easier for the user to start generating really engaging content. So you can see this merge of the modalities. Some of the other elements that we saw in Sora 2 that was quite interesting is you can get the characters to sing, for example. And the music and the voice really becomes quite passable in terms of the quality. And you can kind of see, if you squint, how all of these modalities are starting to come together, where you've got the text part could be the joke writing part, the narrative part of it. There could be reasoning elements embedded in it. Then we've got the image and the video, so that's the visual aspect. And then you've got the audio, where the spoken word is one, the sound effects is another, but then also the music. So you start almost getting Sora kind of competing with companies like Suno on song generation. So that will be another interesting one to look out for, whether we're going to get these more single models that can kind of do everything.
You're talking about improvements in merging different models, but you said one of the easiest tells is like text generated in an image. So text generation seems pretty easy by now. How come image generation models have trouble rendering text?
It's kind of a miracle that it works at all, considering if you imagine how it's actually done. So the way it works is with diffusion-based models, you get a lot of noise, and then they work backwards and through different steps and have removed the noise, and then you've got the image emerging. And you can kind of see maybe how a forest or something like that could look absolutely fine because they're a bunch of leaves, and as long as they look fine together, humans can't easily tell without looking very carefully whether there are mistakes. But if it's something like text, if it needs to be rendered very precisely, it's quite impressive how far that technique was pushed. But models such as the Google's Nano Banana model or the GPT image models, the techniques are a little bit shifting from these completely diffusion-based models, and it looks like they're applying more autoregressive approaches. Speaking in a very high-level way, they go a little bit more step by step, and then they seem to be applying diffusion over the top to just tighten things up. And if you kind of go step by step with images, then we saw a big jump in the quality of text. So now the models such as Nano Banana, such as the GPT image models, they could really render quite a lot of text. That's the improvement that we see with image models. And if one still image could take 10 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe a minute sometimes, and it can render the text perfectly, imagine in a video you'd have 24 of these stills a second. So we cannot really say, okay, we're going to take 40 minutes to generate one short clip. So that's why the quality kind of degrades just because we're not putting as much compute. So I think it's technically possible to render it as perfectly as you would with images, but it would just take really a crazy amount of compute for that to happen. So I would say the quality of the imagery that you get in video models now is probably equivalent to the quality of images that we got maybe 18 months ago, 2 years ago. You can see how that will probably lag behind, and the quality of the video will probably get in a couple of years' time is the quality of the images we get right now. Audio is another one that was sort of on the cusp of going mainstream, and people do use it a bit, but we haven't had really great, very popular, very viral moments with audio models more recently. There was one, I want to say maybe about a year ago with OpenAI, when they demoed their audio model. It took them a while to roll it out, and now I don't get the sense that a lot of people use audio models. And personally, for me, I would say the quality is a lot lower than the text models. So when we saw the text models really run away with it and the quality really go up, it looks like the more real-time audio models haven't really improved on that kind of underlying intelligence layer. That's another one to look out for and see if we do get some big improvements in that space. Right now, it didn't seem like it was big priority for the labs just now.
For real-time audio AI, are you talking about like when I call into customer service and the representative is in a different country, but then they can put a filter on it to make it sound like they're coming from another country?
That could be one application, or you just don't need a person at all, and it just completely audio AI agent. And that certainly happens already, and there are a bunch of startups who are doing that. I would guess they're probably a little bit bottlenecked by just the quality of the audio models. And there are a couple of different ways how you can do the audio part. One is that you get text to audio. So you get the text model to do the work. Maybe it needs to look up some information from your account, for example, and then it will output the text, and then that text gets rendered into audio. So that could be one part that we had for many years now. The new innovation was maybe about a year ago, 18 months ago, is the real-time voice, where that transcription doesn't happen and it goes directly audio to audio. And I think that still feels like the more niche part, where it's more research phase probably right now. You can already do it on applications like ChatGPT, on Gemini as well, and probably several others. But the quality of the actual output is pretty poor versus what you get with the regular language models.
One of your predictions here is about edgy applications. Now, be careful now, we don't want to get blocked on anything. But it seems like some of the edgy applications are always pushing forward innovation because there's big demand, there's a lot of investment in there. Tell me more.
In terms of the edgy applications, we heard like Sam Altman kind of mention erotica, which I think he regretted a little bit considering how much attention that part got. We see xAI investing in this kind of companion, and they seem to be getting traction. I mean, it's hard to gauge considering it is pretty private experience that people have, so it's a bit hard to gauge how popular those things are. We certainly see that these sorts of applications were always leading in any new media. It's kind of maybe strange that it hasn't taken off as much so far. I think once we get better voice, once we get better video, maybe more real-time video that you don't need to wait for 2 minutes for, and it will be high quality, then you can get all of these things come together. And this is not a wish. I don't necessarily want for there to be like a lot of AI companions around, but I think it's just inevitable that that's what's going to happen. And I think right now there are a lot of companies like OpenAI, like Google, like Anthropic, who probably don't want to make this their mainstream business because they want to raise a lot of money and they want to be working with governments and so on. But maybe the second-tier companies who are trying to catch up, or completely new startups, they wouldn't be worried about that at all. So they're just going to go into these markets and really attack them head on. So that's probably what's going to happen. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't taken off as much yet. But maybe as we see, especially video and audio develop, it's kind of inevitable, I think, that these sorts of applications start growing a lot more. Image models have been relying on diffusion as a core technique for several years now. The problem with diffusion, in my mind, is that it's very hard for it to be very precise. I'm surprised how far it got pushed in terms of rendering of full sentences, for example, but it cannot do some things that models like Nano Banana can do, for example, where you give it some data and it will output precise charts, which would be to scale and so on. So it's something that you could actually imagine a consultant using in a presentation, or maybe at some point it could be that an architect could just give it a bunch of inputs and it could create a perfect architectural diagram. That could happen with other techniques, but it's very hard to see how that could happen with diffusion-based models. To me, it feels like just looking at our data, and anecdotally as well, it doesn't feel like there's been that much improvement in diffusion-only models in the last kind of year or so. And if you look at the Google models, not the Nano Banana models, but other models, Imagen 3 and Imagen 4. And we didn't see that much improvement in terms of the rankings of these two models. And more anecdotally as well, it is a slightly better model, but certainly not that much better. The prediction that I've got is that by half year, there wouldn't be any diffusion-based models in our leaderboard in the top 5. So we'll see new models come out that are not diffusion only, and then they will just surpass the diffusion-based models. We don't know exactly how these models work, so I don't want to be overly precise on the techniques because I probably was going to get that wrong, but it looks like they work in a quite different way. At a high level, what we want, regardless of maybe precise technique that is applied, what we want is much more fine-grained control. So we want to say, okay, take this bit of the image, take it out, replace it with this. And you can kind of do it with masking techniques with diffusion, but it's still nowhere near as precise. And maybe it could work if you just want to take the square out, for example. But if I've got a decorated wall or something like that, you want to replace every flower with another flower or something like that, then it just becomes completely impossible to do with diffusion-based techniques. There are definitely different approaches that we've seen where they're much more precise, and where I would hope that we're going to get to, and I haven't really seen exactly how it might work, is the kind of more reasoning-based models. And it could be done maybe with reasoning-based text and then with the reasoning-based images being generated from it. But that still feels like a little bit indirect. So I'm hoping someone's going to come up with some interesting way how we could have reasoning-based images or reasoning-based songs as well, for example. That would be really fun to see, where the generations are not done in this kind of one shot. But for example, for songs, it's maybe interesting to explore that sometimes when you hear really good songs being written, you can not only detect certain very repetitive pattern, there's sometimes pattern breaks, and then there's something else, and then there's something else. And there's certainly many different songs that you can't imagine the AI's writing at all. So like a Bohemian Rhapsody, there is no way AI could write this. Not because it's kind of can't write any segment of this song, so like presumably it could, but put it all together, I think with current techniques it's completely impossible. It just doesn't work in that kind of way. So similar for images, I hope that with songs and with audio, we get these kind of more closer to reasoning-based techniques, which can give us much more variety, much more precision in how this media could be generated.
I heard that image generation models have a variable or a parameter called like temperature, which varies how creative the generation turns out. Is that why images are so hard to get consistent, like when you have repeat trials, or is it because of that diffusion technique?
I'm trying to think across different models. I think there are different kind of randomness parameters. It's maybe not temperature exactly, but there is definitely variability that we get from image models for sure. So you definitely get lack of control. I have seen some models have like a little bit of some kind of randomness of how wild the images would be. So there are creativity knobs that could be pulled. With images, sometimes you do want that. So if you're trying to have a creative campaign, or you're just trying to come up with some completely different images that you're brainstorming, you probably do want that because it's more creative endeavor than writing, for example, a legal report or something like that. So that's probably something that we shouldn't lose. And something that I actually have seen as a side effect of, for example, us losing a bit of creativity is that in the latest image models, which are really good, so Nano Banana models, the OpenAI models, they are very good at writing text. But quite often the way the text comes across is that it's kind of looks like it's been printed. So it's very precise. It's all in a straight line. It's all kind of nice font, very legible, very clear. But if you want to have a nice poster or something creative, then you actually don't want it to be written out in a very precise way. Sometimes you want letters to be jumping up and down and be very creative. And quite often we lose that just because we're trying to tune in and make the writing very precise and legible. And it's probably a lot easier to train for writing being legible rather than writing being very creative and letters being different shapes, sizes, and colors.
So these are your predictions for rich media in particular. How confident are you about your predictions?
Yeah, I feel like these are not too wild. Like, I feel like this is going to happen. I think diffusion models will start fading away. That's kind of starting to happen already. So I think this will just crystallize this year. I think in terms of the merging of the different mediums, that might happen in some smaller way, but maybe that might not come true, but for more technical reasons, considering it's probably just not viable to generate 3-minute videos, which will also include a song. So I think that will technically happen, but maybe not quite be as in your face. I think the Edgy applications I'm pretty confident that will happen. And it's kind of happening already. We see the inklings of this, but I think they'll go much more mainstream. And the one in terms of the AI movie short gaining prominence, I think that's because it's so dependent on good directors, writers taking this up. It's possible that it might not happen if there's a backlash and the people who'd be talented enough to go and make it really prominent, maybe they just might not take it up. But I think the tools will be there. So this one is, I guess, depends on the more cultural trends of how things will go.
All right, so we'll keep on moving to your next 2026 predictions. And if you can't wait, we'll drop a link to the predictions in the description below.